Let's talk about strings. Now, a string, also referred to as a string literal, is a sequence of one or more characters represented programmatically as an array of characters. Now, if you don't understand what an array is yet, that's fine. We're going to talk about arrays a bit later. But in Python, strings can be surrounded by a pair of either single or double quotation marks. Now, while you can use either to wrap an individual string, you cannot mix the two, meaning you cannot use a single quotation mark with a double or vice versa. So let's go ahead and take a look here at an example of that. So if I wanted to print out a string value, and we've already done this before, so you've seen this, but just to reiterate, if I say print hello, right, that is a string, and you can see it's encapsulated by those two quotation marks, double quotation marks. And I can also write the string here with single quotation marks like this. Now, if I tried to use both of them at the same time, that's going to throw an error. So for example, I'll go ahead and insert a new cell here. If I try to say print hello, and I use one single and one double like this, well, that's going to give me an error. Now, when you're working with strings with any programming language, it is an important skill to develop, especially when you're dealing with text or user input data. One string manipulation operation that is commonly performed is what's called string concatenation, where two or more strings are combined together. To actually do concatenation, we use the plus sign. So what is the addition operator with mathematics and numbers is the concatenation operator with strings. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example here. So if I have a name, for example, if I have one string that is Andy, and I want to combine it with another string, I just use the plus sign here. So we can say Andy Warhol. And if I go ahead and run this and print it out, so we'll say print name, you'll see that it actually combines the names together. Now, what you also notice here is that it didn't put a space in between them. This is what we refer to as the string literal. Things are very literal in that, if we want there to be a space here, we actually have to put a literal space there. So we can put an open and close parentheses with a space inside of it, and then another plus sign, and this would effectively combine these three things. Right now, I know this might seem a little bit redundant to you. You're saying, well, why wouldn't we just kind of take all of this here and get rid of this and just add a space like that? Wouldn't that give us the same result? And yes, it would, but that kind of defeats the purpose of this example, right? We want to illustrate that the plus sign can be used for concatenation. Now, concatenation can also be performed using variables. So for example, if we want to take here the first name and make that a separate variable, so this is Andy, and then we have our last name, which is Warhol. Well, then we can create a third variable called full name that combines the two previous variables. And of course, we're also going to want to put a space there so that we have it nicely formatted when we actually print it out. We can say first name plus, and then we're going to do open quotations, close quotations with a space in the middle there, and then we'll put last name. And so if we run this and print it out, full name, and I'm not going to, just to be consistent, I'll put underscore here for full name. And run that, we can see we get the same results. Now, another useful way to manipulate strings is using what's called the format method. So the format method enables us to add values to a string using placeholders, and you'll see what I'm talking about in just a second. And placeholders are basically an ordered list of values. So while this approach might not be as intuitive as simply using the plus sign to concatenate and combine strings, it is generally a cleaner approach when combining multiple values. So when you're using the format method, we're going to use curly brackets for the placeholders where values should be added, and then those values will be injected into the string based on the order that they appear. Let's take a look at a few examples to get a better idea of what we're talking about here. So if we want to inject variables here, let's say first name, again, we're going to say is Andy. And then let's say print, and we're going to create a string here. We say hello. We're just going to say hello to Andy, but we don't need to use the concatenation here if we want to use the format method. We're going to use these curly brackets here, and that represents where we want to put this variable that is the first name variable. And then we'll say dot format, and then we're going to put in the variable that we want to inject into the string, and that is first name. So you can see here that the idea is we have some string, and anywhere we want to put variables, we're going to put these open and closed curly brackets there, and then followed by the period for the format method, and then we're going to pass in the name of the variable that we want to inject into that string. So if we actually run this now, we will see hello Andy, as it has injected the first name variable into that string. And where this really becomes very useful is when we have multiple values that we want to inject into a string. So let's say that we want to expand on this a little bit, and we're going to say hello, and we're going to put the first name there. So we're going to put open and close curly brackets, and then we're going to put a comma, and we're going to continue this statement to say you are placeholder years old with an exclamation point. And this is useful because we can use, not static values, but we can reference variables and inject them into this string. So we could, for example, have some standard message that changes based on the user. If we're having some user log into an application, we can have the standard message and we can inject into it what is the person's correct name and what is their age, if we're maybe celebrating their birthday or something like that in the application. So we can say dot format and pass in first name, and then we can pass in, we don't have a variable for age. We can go ahead and create one real quick. If we want to say age equals 25, well, then we can just put age in right here and then run this, and it'll say, hello, Andy, you are 25 years old. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of situations where it would make more sense to just use the concatenation plus sign technique. And there's also a lot of useful cases for the placeholder format approach. Let's take a look at some more examples. So, placeholders can be used, we can use indexes, such as something like this, where we might have a variable named price that we're going to kind of use as an index. We can also use numbered indexes, or we can just use empty placeholders, which by default is what we generally use. And all of these are going to produce the same results. So let's just take a look at 3 different examples that produce the same results. So we'll say output 1, and here we're going to use indexes, named indexes. So we can say my name is, and we'll put open close curly brackets, F name for first name, and then I'm age here, and then we're going to go ahead and put format, and we'll pass into that F name equals Andy. So you can see we're actually replacing the index values with some other values. And then we can say age equals 25. If we go ahead and run this, actually we have to print that out. So let's go print output 1. See, my name is Andy, I'm 25. We can do the same thing with numbered indexes. So if we want to say output 2 equals my name is, open close curly bracket, we'll say 0 for our first index, I'm 1 dot format, and then we can just simply pass in Andy. Oh, I messed up my, make sure you get your quotations there correct. So we'll say format, another string here, Andy, and then we'll pass in the value of 25, right? And so if we print this out, we're actually going to get the exact same, or we should get the exact same output, just using a different technique, using these numeric placeholders as opposed to these named index values here. So this is name indexed, this is numeric indexed, and then we can also use empty placeholders like we did before. So we can say output 3 equals my name is, open close, I'm, open close, and then simply really the same thing we have here, we can just copy and paste this, right? So dot format Andy in 25. And if we were to print that out, assuming that we didn't make any errors, yep, we get the exact same values here. So that's 3 different techniques to accomplish the same exact thing. Another important concept to understand with strings is indexing and how strings are stored in memory. So strings are stored and represented in memory as an array. So an array is a sequence of something, and in this case with a string, it's a sequence of characters, where each character in the array is assigned an index number based on its relative position in that sequence. So in Python and most programming languages, indexing starts at 0. It's what we refer to as zero relative counting. So, for example, if we have a string that is the word apple, the letter A would be located at index 0, and then it would count up from there. So the letter E at the end would be index 4, right? Because it's a total of 5 letters. If it starts counting at 0, that would be A is 0, P is 1, the next P is 2, L is 3, and E is 4. So using the index values, we can reference individual characters in a string using the name of that variable and then square brackets with the index here. So let's take a look at an example. So if I have a word here, let's say word equals watermelon. Let's make sure I spelled that correctly. And I want to actually pull out the first letter of that. I'm just going to use the print statement here. And we're going to say word 0. And actually, this should work without the print statement in Jupyter Notebook. Yeah, so if I just say word 0, it's going to give me the first letter, which is W. Now, if I say, well, give me the third index value, which would actually be the fourth letter, we say word 3, that's going to give me E, which is the fourth letter, right, because we're counting up from 0. And one more time, let's see here, let's see what we get when we type in word index 7. That's going to be L, so that would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, counting up to L. Now, since the index values of a given string are 0 relative, the highest index will always be 1 less than the number of characters in the string, meaning the highest index will equal n minus 1, where n is the length or the number of characters in that string. If we want to find out the character length of a particular string, then we can use another method, which is called the length method, which is len, and then we can just pass in this word. And this will tell us that we have a total of 10 characters in that string. Therefore, the length of the string is 10. The highest index is going to be n minus 1, right? So for example, if I say word 9, that's 10 minus 1, that's going to be the last letter in this word. Now, if we try to reference an index that is greater than or equal to the length of the string, we will receive an index out of range error. For example, if I say, well, if the length of the string is 10, what happens if I try to reference the 10th character as the 10th index? Well, the 10th character is at the 9th index. The 10th character is not at the 10th index. We would get a string index out of range. So you have to be careful about this. Most things are 0 relative in terms of counting. We start at a value of 0 and we go up from there. All right, so now based on what we've learned so far, can you think of a clever way to always return the last character of a string without actually knowing the length of that string? Well, how about using a variable? We can use a variable to store the length of a string, no matter how long it is, and then we can simply subtract 1 from it to get the last character. So let's take a look at an example here. So let's say I have this message that says this is a test of the emergency broadcast system. This is only a test. Now, obviously, I don't want to go through and count how many characters in this message. It's just too long. And it's a lot more effective for me to just create a variable n and set it equal to the length of message. Right? Now, if I try to reference the nth character, right? So if I say message and then pass in n as the index value, well, I'm going to get this string index out of range error. Why? Because, again, the highest index is n minus 1. Right? So if I say n minus 1, that's going to give me the last character, which in this case is this exclamation point. Lastly, we can use indexes to return portions of strings, what we refer to as substrings, and this is referred to as string slicing, and it's very useful in a variety of different scenarios. So the syntax for slicing, it looks like this here. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste in here some markdown. We'll change this to markdown. Right, so this here is the syntax for slicing, where we have this start index, stop index, and then a step value. So for example, let's say that we wanted to just display the first portion of this string here. And, you know, again, I might not know, well, where is this period in the string? We can just kind of take a guess. So let's just start off by saying, well, message 0 to, I'm just going to guess 40. Right, well, that almost got it. Right, we cut it off here, so it looks like we're missing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So if we just go ahead and add 9 to this, that gives us the first portion of that string. Right, so this is a great way if we just wanted to get the first sentence here in this string, we can use this slicing approach. Now, if we wanted to, get different intervals, we could use what's called a step value. So to properly slice a string, you have to give it a start index and a stop index. The step value, however, is optional, and it indicates the intervals at which you want to select characters. So for example, if I had a step value of 2, that would give me every other character in the string from the start to the stop index. So if I take this and just modify it a little bit, I'm just going to copy and paste here, and add a interval or a step value of 2, it'll give me this. Now, in this example, that's not very useful, but there might be some scenarios where using a step value to return every other character or every 3 or every 4 characters might actually be useful. We will be discussing slicing again in a later module when we learn about Python lists, which also use the same technique of indexing.